Hello and welcome to another episode of Mothman's Bookshop. My name's Nicole, and today I'm bringing you a little blast from the past. Today I'll be talking about some children's books I loved as a kid, as well as some books others loved when they were kids. Unsurprisingly, I was a big reader as a kid, but I unfortunately stopped reading outside of school during middle school, and though I read occasionally in high school, I only got back into reading often in 2021. Despite this, I never lost my love of all things literature related, and adored lit class and Shakespeare and everything like that. To be honest, this episode was born because I realized I wouldn't be able to finish The Night Circus in time to write and record the next episode, and my teacher goes, "Well, why don't you talk about children's books?" As a joke. I, of course, being the person I am, went, "That's genius!" And thus, episode 7 of Mothman's Bookshop is born. This will be a medley of reviews. I'll give a short summary of the book, my opinion, and a rating out of 5 stars as usual. I'll be talking primarily about popular books or just books that I remember loving as a kid, so don't get mad if I don't mention something that was published last month. The first book I'll be talking about is Good Dog Carl by Alexandra Day, which is one of my teacher's favorite books from her childhood. It's a picture book completely without words about a Rottweiler taking care of a baby while the mom is at work. They get into all kinds of trouble, like spilling flour everywhere, or a bubble bath that got out of control. But by the time mom got home, they managed to clean everything up, and the mom goes, "Good dog, Carl." I think it's a really cute and wholesome story. The art is in a realistic style, and it is absolutely gorgeous. I'll give this one a solid 4 out of 5 because it wasn't much of a personal staple, but it is really cute. On to the next. This one is a childhood classic for many, and I think most will recognize The Very Hungry Caterpillar by Eric Carle. Before I do the summary, I want to say that this book has a bit of a Mandela effect, because my friends and I remember the book being called The Hungry Caterpillar, but apparently it's The Very Hungry Caterpillar. Anyhow, this book is about a caterpillar that eats and eats and eats, hence the title, and at the end, it wraps itself up into a cocoon and becomes a beautiful butterfly. This was a childhood staple, and I have a very distinct memory of the first time that I heard the story. It was in first grade, and the whole class sat on the carpet in front of the teacher as she read us the book. I personally have always loved it, and it's very nostalgic for me. This book gets a 4.5 out of 5 because of the Mandela effect. Our final book in this sort of beginner category will be Babushka's Doll by Patricia Polacco. It's about a little girl named Natasha who is very impatient and tends to want things now. Her babushka, or grandmother, takes care of her, and one day while she's out getting groceries, Natasha notices Babushka's doll sitting on the shelf. When Natasha plays with it, the doll comes to life and she realizes how hard it is to take care of a child who wants everything right away. This book holds a special place in my heart, mainly due to the art style. If you have a minute, I highly suggest googling the book so you see what I'm talking about. It's a very realistic style and ties a lot of elements of Slavic folk dress into it. This book gets a 5 out of 5 for nostalgia factor and art style. Next, I'd like to talk about some kids' book series. Let's start with my absolute favorite, something I consider S-tier kids lit, the Magic Tree House series by Mary Pope Osborne. In this series, the fairy/enchantress Morgan Le Fay, Arthur of Camelot's right-hand magician, sends siblings Jack and Annie Smith on magical missions throughout history in a magic treehouse, the namesake of the series. The two are called to the treehouse near their house and find a book with the time and place they need to go to. Conveniently, the treehouse also transforms their clothes into something period appropriate, so they don't stick out like a sore thumb. This series is what got me into reading in the first place, and I will never forget it for that. The amount of different characters and situations in each book, as well as the little lessons about friendship and kindness, are something I'll never forget. The series gets a 5 out of 5 from me. Next on the list are The Adventures of Frog and Toad by Arnold Lebel. This is probably one of the older series on the list, primarily published during the 1970s. I'll be honest, I just realized that I dressed like a character from Frog and Toad, but it's not my fault that they were fashion icons. Anyway, this series is about two friends, Frog and Toad, who visit each other's houses for picnics, go on little adventures, and explore the swamps surrounding their area. I loved reading about their little adventures as a kid, but now I can look back and also recognize that these books taught valuable lessons about boundaries and healthy friendships. These books get a 4.5 out of 5. Our next series this fine day is the Amelia Bedelia series by Peggy Parish, specifically the original one because I heard that they remade it into being about a little girl. It has the same premise of Amelia taking everything too literally, but I just wanted to specify. Amelia Bedelia is a precious series about a nanny who took everything she was told very literally. This got her into quite a few awkward situations. One of the moments from the books that I specifically remember is when Amelia's boss told her to ice the fish before a party, which would usually mean putting the fish into a tub with ice cubes or just into the freezer. Amelia didn't realize this and covered the fish in chocolate icing before putting them into the fridge. I don't quite remember what happens after that, but this is a moment that pops into my head every so often and makes me laugh whenever I think of it. Some honorable mentions from this genre of book are Junie B. Jones and Flat Stanley. The series gets a 3 out of 5 because I wasn't as into it as Magic Tree House, but it's still a fun read. Now, there's a series that feels a bit like a fever dream, but is also a vivid memory of many others, and that is the Wayside School series by Louis Sachar. There are a couple books in this series, but they're all more so a collection of short stories about the school rather than one whole story. These stories are all about Wayside School, a school that was meant to have one floor with 30 classrooms on it, but was instead built to be 30 stories tall with one classroom on each floor, except for the 19th floor, which simply doesn't exist. There are a bunch of wacky stories from Wayside, such as one about an evil teacher who turned bad students into apples. Fun fact, Louis Sachar, the author, was a noontime supervisor after college, aka Louis the Yard Teacher, and was beloved by the kids. For those who have never read the books, there's a self-insert character called Louis the Yard Teacher who would do maintenance and supervise recess, and all of the students in the school are based off of students that Sachar knew at the school he worked at. In terms of how much I love the series, it's arguably on the same playing field as Magic Tree House, so 5 out of 5. Final thoughts? I absolutely love talking about books from my childhood for almost 10 minutes. It was a very fun trip down memory lane. I would love to do something similar again, but maybe with books I read in middle school or high school. Now, since I can't really do a general rating, I have some honorable mentions in the form of books my listeners read when they were little. Those books are Goodnight Moon by Margaret Wise Brown, Rapunzel by Paul O. Zelinsky, The Mitten by Jan Brett, The Twits by Roald Dahl, and Curious George by Margaret and H.A. Ray. Thank you all for listening to this episode of Mothman's Bookshop. I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode. If you did and would like to know when the new episode comes out, do yourself a favor and follow the podcast, and if you have any questions or recommendations, feel free to use the form in the description or join the Discord. Once again, my name is Nicole, and I'll see you next week here in Mothman's Bookshop.